Some people find out who you really are on the worst day of your life. My daughter-in-law found out who I was on Mother's Day, in front of a restaurant full of strangers, and by the time dessert plates were cleared, she wished she never had. Welcome back. Pour your coffee, settle in, and get ready, because in these stories, karma always finds the address. Subscribe so you never miss what happens next. My name is Scott Gary. I'm 61 years old. I've got a bad knee from 22 years hauling drywall, and I've been married to the same woman, Heidi, since before either of us could legally rent a car. That Sunday, we got dressed up, real dressed up. The kind of dressed up you do maybe twice a year, because our son Aaron invited us to dinner. His wife Mirabelle picked the place, some new restaurant downtown with white tablecloths, and a wine list thicker than a Bible. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner was going to be the last time Mirabelle ever spoke to my wife like she wasn't worth the air in the room. I also didn't know that our waiter, a kid named Nick, with a crooked name tag, was about to watch the whole thing unravel from 3 feet away, wide-eyed, holding a bill he didn't know what to do with. And I sure as hell didn't know that the manager of that restaurant, a man named Eric, with a handshake like a vice and eyes that looked like he'd seen everything twice, was going to walk over to our table and say one sentence that would turn my daughter-in-law the color of the tablecloth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Heidi had been looking forward to this dinner for 2 weeks. She'd talked about it at breakfast, at the grocery store, on the phone with her sister Sandra. Aaron's taking us somewhere nice, she kept saying, like it was a medal she'd earned. And in a way, it was. Heidi raised that boy, rocked him through croup at 2 in the morning, sat in hospital waiting rooms when he broke his arm falling off the shed roof. Worked a second job the year I got laid off so he could keep playing baseball. She never once made him feel like a burden. The Thursday before, Sandra called the house, and I picked up because Heidi was in the shower. Is she excited? Sandra asked. You'd think Aaron bought her a car, I said. He didn't propose this, you know, Sandra said, lowering her voice like Mirabelle might somehow be listening through the phone line. Mirabelle picked the restaurant. Mirabelle picked the time. I love that boy Scott, but ever since he married her he plans things like he's asking permission. He's happy, I said, because that's what you say about your son's marriage, even when some nights you're not sure it's true. Happy's not the same as respected, Sandra said. You'll see. I didn't think much of it at the time. Sandra's always had opinions about Mirabelle, most of them earned, if I'm being honest, but I try not to let other people's grudges become mine before I've done my own arithmetic. I hung up and went to find a tie that didn't smell like the garage. Sunday morning, Heidi tried on the blue dress 3 times before she left for church, twisting in the bathroom mirror, asking me twice if it was too much. It's exactly enough, I told her, and I meant it. Heidi's not a woman who dresses to be looked at. She dresses to feel like herself, and that Sunday, herself looked like a woman who deserved a nice dinner and didn't need to apologize for wanting one. We drove downtown a little early, the way we always do, because Heidi hates being late and I hate her hating anything. The restaurant sat on a corner with big windows and brass handles on the doors. The kind of place that makes you check your shirt collar before you walk in, even if you already checked it in the truck mirror. Fancy, I said, holding the door. Aaron said Mirabelle picked it, because they do a Mother's Day tasting menu. Heidi said. Isn't that sweet? I didn't know it yet, but sweet was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Aaron and Mirabelle were already seated when the hostess walked us over. A corner table by the window, candle already lit, bread basket already half gone on Mirabelle's side. You look beautiful, Mom, Aaron said, standing to hug her. Mirabelle didn't stand. She looked up from her phone just long enough to say, hi, and go right back to it. I want to be fair here. Mirabelle wasn't always cold. When she and Aaron first started dating, she used to laugh at my jokes. The real laugh, not the polite one. She used to call Heidi for recipes, sat at our kitchen table taking notes on chicken and dumplings, like it was a chemistry final. Something changed over the years. I don't know exactly when. Maybe it was money. Mirabelle came from a family that talked about money the way other families talk about weather, constantly and with great anxiety. Maybe it was her own upbringing, which I never heard a kind word about, not once, not even from her. Maybe some people just get colder as they get more comfortable, the way a bathtub does once you stop running the hot water. All I know is, by that Mother's Day, Mirabelle looked at my wife the way you'd look at a stain on a rented suit. We sat. Menus came. Mirabelle ordered first, before anybody else had even opened theirs, a salad with dressing on the side and no croutons, and make sure the kitchen actually reads that this time. She said it to Nick, our waiter, a kid maybe 22 with a crooked name tag, and the particular calm of someone who'd learned to smile through anything. Of course, ma'am, Nick said. Heidi got the salmon. I got the ribeye, medium, because I'm 61 and I've earned the right to eat red meat without anybody's permission. Aaron ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car payment, and didn't ask if the rest of us wanted a glass before he did, just assumed, the way people do when they've stopped noticing who's paying attention. Big week at work? I asked him, because somebody had to say something that wasn't about salad dressing. Huge, Aaron said, and told a story about a client account that Heidi laughed at twice as hard as it deserved, because that's what mothers do. They give you the laugh even when the joke's thin. Because they remember when you were 7 and thought knock-knock jokes were the height of comedy, and some part of them never stops wanting to encourage you. Mirabelle checked her phone under the table like she thought nobody could see the blue light on her face. Twice, Heidi tried to include her. Asked about her sister's wedding. Asked about a work trip Mirabelle had mentioned once at Christmas. Both times Mirabelle answered in 4 words or less, and went back to scrolling. This isn't what I asked for, Mirabelle told Nick flat. Like she was talking to a vending machine that ate her dollar, when the salad came out with dressing already tossed in. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll fix that right away, Nick said, and I watched his jaw tighten just slightly before he turned around. Kid was working a holiday. Probably needed the tips. Probably had a mother somewhere he'd have walked through fire for. And here he was getting talked down to by a woman who couldn't be bothered to look up from a screen for the woman who raised her own husband. I ate my ribeye and let the conversation happen around me, the way I usually do at these things. I've never needed to be the center of attention. I just like being there. I like watching my family exist in the same room, even on nights when the room's a little colder than it should be. I didn't know it yet, but the coldest part of the night hadn't even arrived. Dinner rolled on. Plates came and went. The second salad arrived correctly this time, and Mirabelle ate exactly half of it before pushing it away, the way people do when the point was never really the food. Then the check came. Nick set the black leather folder in the middle of the table, said something polite about no rush, and started to walk away. That's when Mirabelle reached out and grabbed his wrist. Not violently, just enough to stop him. Actually, she said, loud enough that the table next to us went quiet. We're not paying for her. She pointed at Heidi, my wife, sitting there in the blue dress she'd bought specifically for this dinner, the one she'd tried on 3 times in the store to make sure it wasn't too much. Nick blinked. I'm sorry? Her, Mirabelle said again, like Heidi was a line item she wanted removed. The salmon and the 2 glasses of wine. We're not covering that. Aaron and I are paying for our own meals, and his dad can pay for his dad, but we didn't agree to buy her dinner. There was a silence at that table you could have hung a coat on. Mirabelle, Heidi said quietly. It's fine. I can. No. It's the principle, Mirabelle said, cutting her off, still talking to the waiter and not to my wife. I don't think it's fair that we're expected to pay for everyone every time. This was supposed to be a treat from us, for Mother's Day, not an open tab. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. It was Heidi's Mother's Day dinner, and Mirabelle had just informed a 22-year-old stranger in front of the entire restaurant that the mother in question wasn't included in the celebration of her own holiday. Aaron heard every word. I watched him hear it. And he nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't say a single thing in his mother's defense. My son, the boy Heidi, drove 40 minutes each way to physical therapy for a whole summer after his knee surgery. The boy she sat up with the night before every final exam he ever took, just so he wouldn't be alone with his nerves, just nodded along like his wife was reading off a grocery list. I felt something go cold in my chest, but I didn't say a word. I want you to understand that about me. I am not a man who explodes at restaurants. I am not a man who makes scenes. My father used to say the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest one in it, and I believed him. So I picked up my fork, and I kept eating my ribeye. Heidi didn't say anything either. She just looked down at her plate. I saw her hand go still around her wine glass. 30 years ago, I once watched this woman stare down a hospital administrator who tried to deny Aaron's asthma treatment over a paperwork error, and win. And here she was, silent, in a dress she'd chosen with such care, being told by her son's wife that she wasn't worth a plate of salmon. I didn't know it yet, but somebody else at that restaurant had heard every word too. Nick, the waiter, stood there holding the folder, clearly not trained for this particular flavor of family disaster. I'll go split that up, he said, and walked off toward the back, toward the manager's office. Here's something you should know about Heidi that Mirabelle didn't know. Something Aaron didn't fully know either. Not really. Not the way I knew it, because I'd been married to the woman for 36 years. Heidi doesn't talk about money. Never has. She grew up with none of it, married me with less of it, and somewhere in the last 15 years, through a small inheritance from her aunt, and some frankly terrifying instincts about real estate, she built up more of it than either of us ever expected to see. She never bought a boat, never bought a new car. She still drives that same Buick she's had since Aaron was in high school. She just quietly invested, quietly helped people, quietly kept most of it to herself, including the fact that 4 years ago, she'd bought a stake in a restaurant group downtown. Silent partner, anonymous, mostly, just a name on paperwork, nobody at the table level ever saw. I knew. I'd signed things too as her husband, when the lawyers needed a second signature. I never talked about it. It wasn't my money to talk about. And frankly, it wasn't my business to brag about either. Heidi liked it that way. She liked walking into rooms as nobody in particular. That night she was walking into a restaurant she partly owned, being told by her daughter-in-law that she wasn't worth the price of a salmon fillet. Now let me tell you about Eric. Because without Eric, and without Eve, none of what happened next makes any sense at all. 3 years before that Mother's Day, Eric's wife Eve got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick where doctors use words like aggressive and narrow window. And families start quietly researching how second mortgages work while pretending, in front of each other, that everything's going to be fine. Eric worked in restaurants his whole life. Good insurance wasn't really a phrase that applied to him. The surgery Eve needed cost more than Eric made in 2 years combined. He never told anyone at work. Pride mostly. He just started picking up every extra shift he could find, selling anything that wasn't nailed down, his motorcycle, a set of tools that had belonged to his father, a watch he'd worn every day for a decade, and losing weight from stress that had nothing to do with dieting. Somebody noticed anyway. Heidi had eaten at that restaurant a dozen times before she ever owned a piece of it, back when it was still independently run, back before the ownership group bought in. She liked the corner table by the window. She always tipped Eric's staff too generously and asked genuine questions about their lives, the kind most customers never bother with. When she heard through the grapevine, through Adam, a young line cook who used to bus tables at her sister Sandra's church fundraisers before he ever set foot in a professional kitchen, the kind of small world connection that only happens in a town where everyone's cousin knows everyone else's cousin, that the general manager's wife needed a surgery he couldn't afford, she didn't think twice. She paid for it. All of it. Anonymously, through a hospital financial assistance fund set up under a name that traced back to nothing anyone could follow. A trust, a lawyer, 3 layers between her signature and the final paperwork. Eric never found out who did it. Not for 2 years. All he knew was that a letter arrived one gray afternoon, saying the balance had been cleared by an anonymous donor, and Eve went into surgery 3 weeks later instead of 9 months later. And Eve came out the other side of it alive. Eve was alive. Eve was healthy. And Eric had spent 2 years wanting to say thank you to a stranger he thought he'd never meet. He never got the chance. Not until that night. Not until table 12. Adam, the line cook who'd made the introduction Heidi never even knew he'd made, still worked in that kitchen. He'd been promoted twice since, sous chef now, running the pass most nights. He was the one who first spotted the name Gary on the reservation sheet that morning, and thought nothing of it. Because Gary is a common enough name. And he had no idea Aaron Gary was Heidi Gary's son. Small towns and small industries are full of threads like that, invisible until the night they suddenly aren't. I only learned the full shape of that story much later, in pieces, over Sunday dinners, that hadn't happened yet, on the night I'm telling you about. Eric told it best. One evening months afterward, a glass of wine in his hand and Eve's fingers laced through his across the table. I remember the exact day the diagnosis came in, Eric said. I remember thinking, I run a restaurant that seats 140 people a night, and I can't afford to save my own wife. That's a specific kind of helpless. You feel it in your teeth. He stopped eating, Eve said quietly. Lost 11 pounds in a month. I was the one dying, and he was the one wasting away. I sold my father's tools, Eric said. Man worked with his hands his whole life. Left me that toolbox like it was the family Bible, and I sold every piece of it to a pawn shop on the east side for $800. Didn't tell Eve for a year. Adam had been the one bussing tables that spring at a fundraiser dinner Sandra's church hosted for a food pantry, the kind of event where half the guests are there for the cause, and the other half are there because Sandra guilted them into buying a table. Heidi worked that fundraiser every year, quietly, the way she did most things, refilling coffee urns and washing dishes instead of sitting with the donors who'd paid for the good seats. Adam mentioned, bussing a table near her, that his manager's wife was sick, and that the whole restaurant staff had been chipping in tips toward a fund that wasn't going to come close to covering the surgery. He wasn't asking Heidi for anything. He was just talking, the way people talk to a stranger drying dishes beside them at 11 at night. Heidi didn't say a word to him about it then. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at the hospital's financial office. 3 weeks after that, Eve was on an operating table instead of a waiting list. I spent 2 years trying to find out who did that, Eric told me. I called that hospital's billing office so many times they started recognizing my voice. All they'd ever tell me was that it came through a private trust, no name attached, case closed. I used to lie awake wondering if I'd ever get to say thank you to whoever it was before I died without doing it. And instead, Eve said, smiling at Heidi across the table. She showed up eating salmon and getting told she wasn't worth the bill. Small world, I said. Small world with excellent timing, Eric said, and lifted his glass. Nick found Eric in the back hallway near the kitchen, practically vibrating. Table 12, Nick said. The daughter-in-law just told me not to charge the mother-in-law for her meal. Made her say it out loud, in front of everybody. The husband just nodded. Eric frowned. Table 12. That's the 4, top by the window? Yeah. Eric walked to the little podium near the host stand, pulled up the reservation. Aaron, Gary, party of 4. He scrolled up, out of habit more than anything, to the account notes, the kind restaurants keep on regulars, on investors, on anyone worth remembering. And there it was, a flag he hadn't seen trigger in over a year. Heidi Gary, ownership group, founding partner. Do not seat without notifying GM. Eric's face changed. Nick told me later, it was like watching a man realize he'd almost stepped on a rake in the dark. That's Heidi Gary, Eric said quietly. Nick blinked. The mom at table 12? That's the woman who owns 11% of this restaurant, Eric said, and 2 others in this group. Adam wandered out from the kitchen just then, wiping his hands on his apron, and caught the tail end of it. Wait, Gary? Heidi Gary? He said the name like it had weight to it, like he was turning over a memory he hadn't touched in years. You know that's the same Heidi that helped you and Eve out. Back when, I know, Eric said, and his voice had gone somewhere quiet and far away. I know exactly who that is. He didn't rush. That's the thing about a man who's spent 30 years managing dining rooms. He doesn't rush, even when his hands are shaking a little. He smoothed his jacket. He told Nick to bring a fresh glass of the good champagne, the one they don't put on the menu. And he walked toward table 12. I saw him coming before Heidi did. Something in the way the room shifted, other servers stepping back, the hostess straightening up, Adam appearing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. Watching, I'd worked construction long enough to recognize when somebody important walks onto a site. This was that, except in a tuxedo. Good evening, Eric said, stopping at the head of our table. He wasn't looking at Aaron. He wasn't looking at Mirabelle, who had gone very still, sensing, the way predators sense things, that something had shifted in the room and she was no longer at the top of the food chain. He was looking at my wife. Welcome back, Mrs. Gary, Eric said. It's an honor to finally have you at one of our tables again. Heidi looked up, confused, half smiling the way you do when you're not sure if someone's talking to you. Eric, hi, everything's wonderful, thank you. Ma'am, Eric said, and his voice cracked just slightly, just enough that I noticed. The ownership transfer finalized this week. You're now majority partner on this location. I've been hoping to say thank you to you in person for longer than you know. The table went silent. Not restaurant ambient noise silent. Dead silent, like someone had hit mute on the whole room. I watched two tables nearby go quiet too, sensing a scene the way people always do. Mirabelle's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I'm sorry, she said. Majority. What? Eric didn't even look at her. Mrs. Gary owns this restaurant, he said simply. Owns it, and two others in the group. Has for years. Quietly, the way she does everything, from what I understand. I watched Aaron's face go through about 6 emotions in 4 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, and then something that looked a whole lot like fear, because his son's brain math was doing what mine had already done. We just told the owner of this restaurant she wasn't worth a plate of salmon. Mom, Aaron said, voice suddenly small. You own this place? Heidi set down her wine glass very carefully, the way she does when she's deciding whether to say something she can't take back. I have a stake in it, yes, she said. I don't usually mention it. I don't like being treated differently because of money. She didn't know it yet either, I thought. How differently she was about to be treated tonight, and for exactly that reason. Eric turned, finally, toward Mirabelle. His smile stayed polite, professional, but his eyes had gone flat, the way mine go when a subcontractor tries to shortchange me on a job. I understand there was some confusion about the check, he said. I'll be taking care of that personally. That won't be necessary, Mirabelle said, straightening up in her chair, trying to reclaim ground she'd already lost. It's a family matter. We'll sort it out ourselves. With respect, Eric said, you made it a restaurant matter the moment you said it in front of my staff. He glanced at Nick, still hovering a few feet back. Nick heard it. So did the table beside you. So did I, by the time it reached my office. Here's the sentence. The one that made their faces go pale. Eric said it soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd shouted it. Given that Mrs. Gary is the majority owner of this restaurant, Eric said, looking directly at Mirabelle, I'm afraid it's actually the two of you who won't be paying for anything here again, because you're no longer welcome at this location, effective tonight. I have never in 36 years of marriage watched a room change temperature that fast. Mirabelle's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Excuse me? You can't. We're paying customers, we have every right. You have every right to dine at thousands of other restaurants in this city, Eric said, still calm, still that same soft, professional voice. Just not this one, or the other two in our group. I'll have the host add a note to the reservation system. Aaron, Mirabelle snapped, spinning toward my son. Say something. But Aaron wasn't looking at her. Aaron was looking at his mother. And for the first time all night, maybe for the first time in longer than that, he looked genuinely ashamed. Mom, he said again, quieter this time. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. You didn't need to know I owned the restaurant, Aaron, Heidi said, and her voice was steady in a way that made the whole table go still again. You needed to know I was your mother. That should have been enough. I want to tell you I felt some big surge of triumph in that moment. Some cinematic satisfaction. Mostly what I felt was tired. Tired the way you feel after you've been carrying something heavy for longer than you realized, and somebody finally takes it out of your hands. I'll get the check sorted, Eric said, straightening his jacket. Mrs. Gary, Missa, Gary, dinner is on the house tonight, of course. For the two of you. He didn't say of course about Aaron and Mirabelle. He didn't need to. Mirabelle tried one more time. People like her always do. They mistake a first no for an opening bid. This is insane, she said, standing up, chair scraping loud against the floor. You're going to ban us over a misunderstanding? Over one comment? Eric didn't blink. Ma'am, I've worked in this industry for 30 years. I've heard every version of we're not paying for her there is. It's never once been a misunderstanding. Then he did something I didn't expect. He looked at Nick, still hovering near the server station, and said, loud enough for the whole section to hear, Nick, comp table 12's dessert 2, on the house, for Mr. and Mrs. Gary only. And box up anything the young couple hasn't finished. They'll be leaving shortly. Adam appeared at the edge of the dining room by then, still in his kitchen whites, and I caught him looking at Heidi with an expression I didn't understand until much later, the look of a man watching a debt finally get repaid in a currency nobody expected. Aaron stood up slowly. He looked, for a second, like he might actually apologize. Really apologize. The kind with eye contact and no excuses attached. But Mirabelle grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door before he got the chance, hissing something about lawyers that nobody at that table, least of all Eric, seemed the slightest bit worried about. They left without paying for a single thing. Eric made sure of that too. Turns out being banned from a restaurant doesn't exempt you from the bill you already ran up, and a manager's assistant quietly caught them at the coat check, with a printed receipt and a very polite smile. I watched through the window as Mirabelle snatched the receipt out of the assistant's hand, scanned it, and went a little more pale reading the total than she had at the table. Heidi didn't watch them go. She sat there, hands folded, staring at the tablecloth like she was doing math she didn't want to be doing. "You okay?" I asked, finally breaking my long ribeye-fueled silence. "I don't know," she said. "I think I am. I think I'm just sad it took this for anyone to say something. I should have said something," I told her. At the table, when she said it the first time, Heidi shook her head. "No, you did the right thing. You didn't give her a reaction to feed off. That's exactly what she wanted, a fight she could call an overreaction later. Instead, she got the truth, served cold, by somebody with the receipts. That's my wife. Even mid-heartbreak, she's got better instincts than most people have on their best day." Eve herself showed up near the end of the night. Eric must have called her the second things settled, because she walked in still wearing her coat, found our table, and just stood there a moment looking at Heidi like she was trying to memorize her face. Then she reached across the table and took both of Heidi's hands in hers, silent, her eyes wet, and Heidi's went wet too. And for a solid 10 seconds neither of them said a single word. Some thank yous don't need words. That one didn't. Aaron called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again that afternoon. Heidi finally picked up, and I sat next to her on the porch swing while she held the phone a little away from her ear, like the apology coming through it had teeth. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have said something at the table. I was just caught off guard," Heidi said. "You had 2 years of marriage to know your wife might say something like that about me one day, Aaron. You had 30 minutes of watching it happen at that table to correct it. You didn't. You nodded." I know, Mom. Please. I love you," Heidi said. And she meant it. Every word. Because that's the kind of mother she is even now. But I'm done pretending I didn't hear you agree with her. You can call again when you've figured out what you actually think, not what's easiest to say when your wife's watching. She hung up. Didn't cry. Didn't rage. Just set the phone down on the porch railing and looked out at the yard for a long minute. Mirabelle never called at all. I heard, through Sandra, through the family grapevine that carries news whether you want it or not, that she'd been telling people the restaurant made a scene out of nothing, and that Heidi was being dramatic about a joke. Sandra also told us Mirabelle tried booking a table under a different last name at one of the group's other 2 restaurants a few weeks later, got seated, got halfway through her appetizer, and got quietly asked to leave once the host ran her card and the system flagged the name on file. Sandra laughed so hard telling that story she had to put her coffee down. I heard something else too, a few weeks after that, from Adam, who'd started dropping by the house sometimes with Eric now. The 4 of them, Eric, Eve, Heidi, and me, having become an odd sort of family over sourdough bread and too much red wine on Sunday evenings. Adam mentioned, almost in passing, that Aaron had come by the restaurant alone one night, sat at the bar, and asked Eric if there was any way to talk to Heidi through the staff. Eric told him the same thing he'd tell anyone that wasn't his to arrange. That door, if it opened again, was going to open because Heidi opened it, not because a manager did the work for her. It never fully closed. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about erasing a son. Heidi still loves Aaron. She'll love him until the day she dies. Because that's a door that doesn't close. Not really. Not for a mother like her. She answered his calls, eventually, once a month or so, short and careful conversations that never mentioned Mirabelle's name. She sent a card on his birthday. She asked after his job. But love and welcome aren't the same thing. And Heidi made that distinction with a precision I'd never seen from her before that dinner. Mirabel wasn't invited to Thanksgiving that year, wasn't invited the year after either. When Aaron mentioned, carefully, hopefully, that Mirabel wanted to make things right with a phone call, Heidi told him the same thing every time. An apology isn't a phone call, Aaron. It's 2 years of behavior. I'm watching for the behavior. The phone call means nothing without it. 2 years came and went. The behavior never came. Christmas that first year was the hardest test of it. Aaron called in early December, voice careful, and asked if he and Mirabel could come by on the 25th like always. You're welcome, Heidi told him. Mirabel isn't. Not this year. Mum, she's my wife. You can't just uninvite my wife from Christmas. I can absolutely uninvite anyone I want from a dinner I'm hosting in my own home, Heidi said, and her voice didn't rise even a little. That's not cruelty, Aaron. That's just how invitations work. I invited her to my birthday for 4 years running before she ever thought to invite me to a single thing of hers. I don't owe her an open door forever, just because she's related to you by paperwork. Aaron didn't come that Christmas. Sat home with Mirabel instead, out of what I assume was some mix of loyalty and stubbornness. And Heidi cried about it that night after the dishes were done, quietly at the kitchen table, in a way she thought I didn't notice. You don't have to keep holding the line, I told her, sitting down across from her. Nobody would blame you for letting it go a little. For his sake. I'm not doing it for spite, Heidi said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm doing it because if I let it go, I'm the one teaching him that it's fine. That a woman can humiliate his mother in public and get invited back to Christmas 18 months later like nothing happened, as long as enough time passes and nobody brings it up. I raised him better than that. I have to act like I raised him better than that, even when it costs me the holiday. Sandra came over that Christmas instead, brought a pie, sat with us until 11 talking about everything except the empty chair at the table. She'd known Mirabel's mother years back, it turned out, a fact she'd never mentioned before that year, maybe out of some old loyalty. Maybe because it had never seemed relevant until it suddenly was. Mirabel's mother was the same way, Sandra admitted finally, turning her wineglass slowly on the table, ran hot and cold with people depending on what she thought they could do for her. I used to feel sorry for Mirabel as a kid, actually, watched her learn that lesson early, that love in that house came with conditions attached. Doesn't excuse what she did to you, Heidi, but it explains it, maybe. People raised in a transaction tend to grow up doing the math out loud. I don't need it explained, Heidi said. I needed her to not do it. She's a grown woman. She had 30 years to decide who she wanted to be. Same as the rest of us. The second Christmas, Aaron asked again. Same conversation, nearly word for word. Heidi gave him the same answer. He came alone that year. First time in 2 years he'd shown up to anything without Mirabel standing beside him. And it was quiet, and a little sad, and a little bit like healing, all at the same time. He helped me carry the folding chairs down from the attic. He ate 2 helpings of Heidi's stuffing, and told her, unprompted, that nothing else in the world tasted like it. He didn't apologize again that night, not in so many words, but something in how carefully he treated his mother that whole evening said more than another round of I'm sorry ever could have. Mirabel wasn't there to see any of it. That was, I think, exactly the point. There's one more thing I have to tell you before I get to the end of this, because it's the moment I understood the ban at that restaurant hadn't taught Mirabel anything at all. It had just taught her to be careful about which rooms she said things like that in. It happened at the grocery store of all places, about 8 months after that Mother's Day. Heidi and I were in the cereal aisle, arguing gently about whether we needed the big box of oatmeal or the small one, when I heard a voice I recognized say, too brightly, Heidi, "Oh my gosh. Hi, Mirabel, alone, cart half full, wearing the kind of smile people put on when they've rehearsed a version of an apology in their car on the way over, and are hoping they don't have to use it." Mirabel, Heidi said, polite, flat, the way you'd greet a coworker you didn't dislike but definitely didn't invite to your birthday. It's so good to see you, Mirabel said. You look great. I've been meaning to call. You have my number, Heidi said. You've had it for 11 years. Mirabel's smile flickered but held. I know. I wasn't sure you wanted to hear from me. After everything. I don't know what you mean by everything, Heidi said, and I watched her set the small box of oatmeal in the cart with a steadiness that would have fooled anyone who didn't know her the way I did. Everything happened at a restaurant with a manager, 2 waiters, and a room full of witnesses. I'm not sure what part of it you'd like me to pretend I misremembered. I was having a bad day, Mirabelle said. You don't understand what I've been dealing with at work. With my family, I'm sure that's true, Heidi said. I've had bad days too. I've never once, in 36 years, had a bad enough day that I told a waiter not to feed my mother-in-law. Mirabelle's face did something complicated then. Something between anger and shame, the two emotions wrestling for control of the same set of features. So that's it? One bad night and I just don't get to be part of this family anymore? You're still part of this family, Heidi said. You're married to my son. That's not something I get a vote on, and I wouldn't want one. I want Aaron happy, and if you make him happy, that's between the two of you. But being part of a family and being welcome in my home are two different memberships. Mirabelle, you let your card lapse on the second one. I don't know how many more times I need to say that before it actually lands somewhere. That's not fair, Mirabelle said, and her voice cracked, just a little. In a way that might have moved me if I hadn't watched her, 8 months earlier, humiliate my wife over the price of a salmon fillet in front of 40 strangers. No, Heidi agreed. It's not fair. It wasn't fair when you did it, either. Funny how fairness only becomes urgent to some people once they're the ones on the losing end of it. She pushed the cart forward, past Mirabelle, toward the checkout, and I followed, and neither of us looked back. I heard, later, secondhand through Aaron, that Mirabelle cried in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes after that conversation. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. I felt, if anything, a little sad for the version of Mirabelle that might have existed if she'd made different choices a long time ago. Back when she still called Heidi for recipes and meant the laugh she gave my jokes. But sad isn't the same as sorry. And I wasn't sorry. And neither was Heidi. A year to the day, almost, we sat at that same corner table by the window. Just me and Heidi this time. Eric brought the champagne himself, the good stuff, and Eve sat with us for a while before the dinner rush pulled her back to the kitchen, where she now helped Adam run the pastry station 2 nights a week, mostly because she liked being close to the place that had quietly saved her life twice over, once through the surgery, once through the friendship that came after. The restaurant had grown that year, a 4th location opening downtown, Eric promoted to oversee the whole group, Adam finally given his own kitchen to run 2 blocks over. Heidi hadn't planned any of it as some grand design. She just kept doing what she always did, showing up quietly, treating the staff like people instead of furniture, reinvesting instead of skimming profit for herself. Success seemed to follow her the way it follows anyone who never went looking for it in the first place. Any word from Aaron? Eric asked, setting the glasses down. Card for our anniversary, Heidi said. Signed by both of them. You going to answer it? I already did, Heidi said. Thank you. That's what I wrote. Thank you. Nothing more than that. No warmth extended past the edge of politeness. No invitation folded quietly inside the reply. Eric nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Because a man who spent 30 years reading a dining room can read a marriage just as easily. Sandra asked me once, months after it all happened, whether I thought Heidi would ever let Mirabelle back into the family the way she used to be. Recipes and Christmas mornings and easy laughter across the table. No, I told her, and I meant it with everything in me. Heidi doesn't do second chances for people who show her exactly who they are the first time and expect her to forget the demonstration. I think about that dinner a lot, about how Mirabelle spent an entire meal deciding who deserved a seat at that table, never once realizing she was the only one there who didn't. About how a whole restaurant's worth of quiet decency, Eric's, Eve's, Adam's, Nick's, all of it stitched together by one woman's habit of helping people without needing credit for it, was standing right there in the room the whole time, waiting to answer for her. She got her answer, anyway. One sentence. Delivered soft, delivered final, and never once walked back. We're not paying for her. No, Mirabelle. As it turned out, you never were. And you never will be again.